we're talking with Heidi Chan. Nice to see you, Heidi. Thanks very much for agreeing to join in with us today.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. Happy to chat with you. I don't think we've had a lot of chances to just chat. I think we've seen each other on Frequency Freaks and stuff. So
yeah, exactly. And I think Vogue as well. I'd come in, I'd rush in, I'd be looking for something. You'd point me in the direction. I'd hand out my credit card, and away I'd go. So,
right, exactly. Yeah.
So no, it's great. It'll be a great opportunity for us to talk a bit more. So I guess to start with, my questions are, most of them are pretty vanilla. I think they're going to be the kind of things you've seen before. I'd be very surprised if you come across too many, Proust questionnaire things or anything that interesting. But how did you kind of get started with with modular and electronic music?
Those are two pretty different things. I'll start with the modular first because it's a bit more relevant. But I started with modular. I know exactly when. It's like June of 2015 because I have an email of the first like Craigslist communication of buying my first modules. Right. But I got into Eurorack and modular because at the time I was working at a place called Saved by Technology, which some of you may know. Yeah. With Jim Burgess, and at the time I've been working at there on and off for a number of years, and I was working with a guy named Alec Brady, who some of you might also have had met through buying and selling modules. He's now in Vancouver, but at the time we were working together at Saved by Technologies, and then Alex started getting into Eurorack, and he comes in one day, he's like, oh my God, Heidi, like you have to get into this. You have to get into the modular stuff. And we had been sort of connecting over Ableton, and he was trying to get me into like Max for Live and programming and all of that stuff. And then we sat across from each other at Saved by Technology, and one day he was just like, yeah, I'm buying modular. I'm getting into this. Right. And I was like, oh, okay, and like I had a bit of hardware before that, but I was mostly in Ableton using plugins, using like MIDI controllers. And then I like just looked it up, and I'm like, okay. And at that time, I think I had just come back from a tour, and I made a little bit of money, so I had a little bit of extra cash. Right. So I was like, okay. And so there I went. I started looking on Craigslist and Modular Grid, and Alec had an extra set of rails and ears that he just gave to me, some tip-top rails and ears. So he gave me rails and ears. My first modules I bought them together off a gentleman, a Distinct Mark II and a Synthesis Technology Morphing Terrarium.
Wow, cool modules to start with.
Great modules. I don't even remember if I had a power supply back then. I think I had no cables. I had some like TRS mono cables. So as soon as I got a power supply, I was using like the 3, little headphone TRS cables to patch.
Yeah.
And then I think within a few days, I went to Moog Audio and I bought, I think, a VCA and a filter, and then it kind of.
You're on your way to
went. Yeah. And then it's kind of like got crazy from there on.
Right. So and so now though, I mean that's really, so 2015 is actually quite recent. And you mentioned Ableton, and you sort of so tell me a little bit more about your background, I guess, with music and I guess electronic music.
Yeah, I would say my main background is in performance and instrumental music. I spent a number of years as a Japanese taiko drummer, so I was in a professional group. Did a bunch of performances, and then currently I'm also part of. I'm not in a taiko drumming group, but I'm in a Japanese folk music ensemble. Okay. So I still play. I play the Japanese bamboo flute.
Nice.
And so I do like that sort of stuff, some fusion stuff lately. And then I got into electronic music a while back, mainly because I've always been really shy about like playing my music to other people or asking people to help me with making my music. And so I've always so when I came across some like software, I think the first piece of software I got was a demo version of Cakewalk. that like my dad got me.
Mm-hmm.
And so I started programming and arranging my own songs in it. And at that time, I think I was still using like a Sound Blaster, like general MIDI sounds from a Sound Blaster.
Sure.
And because it was a demo version, I couldn't save anything. So I keep the project on for months. I leave the computer on for months. And at that time, I also didn't have proper monitor. That's, Sound Blaster, speakers. And I would record my songs with a cassette, like Walkman.
Nice.
Of my general MIDI arrangements playing back over like Logitech speakers. So I had something like, those were like my first like electronic music recordings.
That's fantastic.
Some of them I still have, but it started off from there. Eventually I realized that, you can like import little wave samples and arrange them that way.
Yeah.
So it started pretty modestly. And
how long ago was that, just out of curiosity?
Oh, that was like maybe in my early mid-20s. So yeah.
So what, like the 90s? Back in the 90s? Early 2000s?
Yeah, like 90s, early 2000s, I would say. Yeah, I think, around that time.
Cool.
And then, then I came across Ableton and then start doing more stuff within Ableton.
And was the music that you made in Ableton sort of more, you mentioned Max for Live, was it more, sort of along the lines aesthetically of the kind of thing you might do with the modular? Like, was it more experimental, or was it more sort of mainstream?
Oh, that's a good question. It was a bit more structured, I would say. Okay. Much more structured, much more repetitive.
Mm-hmm.
So much, bit more beat and melody driven. But that's a good question because the workflow of the modular like completely
changes everything,
reorients you into a different way of working. So the things I come up with in modular, it's probably things I would never come up with sitting in front of a DAW.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, interesting.
So very different. Yeah.
Well, and actually that leads nicely into sort of my next question, which is do you bring nowadays? Do you tend to bring a consistent sort of approach or a sort of set of opening moves to the way that you deal with your equipment, just to kind of get into something, or is every single time you deal with the instrument something altogether new and unique?
I think I try to approach it a little bit differently each time, but I would also say that I think in the past 5 years, like modular has been, I think, half a musical tool, where I've done live sets, I've recorded, music, but a lot of that is also I've used the modular as a learning tool, and I've said this to many people that I've learned more about synthesis in the past 5 years on a modular system than I have in the years before that, using Ableton, using Reason, learning Reactor even.
Wow, so you got into Reactor.
I got into Reactor in my undergrad music and a digital music program. Okay. But once I got my hands on a modular, I think it's a combination of the openness of the modular system, my background as an instrumentalist, like kind of my affinity towards like physical things, the physical act of patching and turning knobs and stuff, and just all the options and offerings that give me, that the modular system gives me.
Right.
So it puts me in different like states a lot of times, and
yes. Yeah.
And sometimes I go in not even planning to make anything musical. So it's like, today I'm gonna really just play with this oscillator because I've never really used that jack and I've never really used that jack.
Right.
And so
almost like a learning or exploration kind of exercise.
Yeah, so sometimes it would start off as a learning exercise, and then I just like start patching around, and then maybe something musical comes up. And then sometimes I'd have like a pretty specific idea, but I would say one thing I don't have in my modular right now, and I don't really need is I don't have anything too programmable. So I don't have anything that I don't have like a fully programmable sequencer. I have the Pittsburgh, the Lifeforms controller, which allows me to enter little sequences. But otherwise, like I don't have any like drum trigger sequencers or anything like that. So,
so it kind of forces you to sort of envision the piece of music or your interaction with the instrument for the first time, sort of as you approach it. It's not like you push a button and resume where you left off last time, kind of thing.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes I wish that things would leave as
Sure.
Things would kind of go back to where it was last time, but they often don't. Even when I like leave a patch on overnight and go back to it, and somehow it would like be totally out of tune.
Because system state is so complicated, right? I mean, even if you leave the patch exactly as it is and you don't touch a single knob and the thing warms up and everything goes right back to where it was before, in terms of the actual settings, phase of LFOs and stuff like that can be off, right? I mean, the reality is that as I like to say, you never cross the same modular twice, right? It's never the same thing, right? So, and I guess is that sort of part of your overall sort of approach to music or your ethos vis-a-vis music? I mean, are you looking, are you sort of consciously looking for a first time, experience? A unique experience with it, more, say along the lines of improvisation, versus structure. Is that sort of what's behind that?
I think I go back and forth between different things all the time. I think I'm just kind of greedy that way. Like I want it. I want it all.
Sure.
I've played in improv series in Toronto. I've played in like experimental electronic music series, and I also play in a completely acoustic traditional Japanese folk ensemble,
right, which
and I love all of that, and I kind of like to keep those worlds separate for me,
right.
I know that it's like, if you play like Japanese flute, why don't you do fusion stuff? And I've tried, like I've used my flute as with an envelope follower and a pitch follower, and I've done all that, and I've experimented with that stuff. But then there's also a part of me that's like, I just want to play Japanese folk music.
Yes, like almost like a separate musical, separate aspect of your musical life. Yeah.
And that stuff is. There's improvised elements in there as well, and there's like set melodies and there's structure. But in terms of the modular, I think the modular is the one thing that I use to kind of carry me to more experimentation, and not even necessarily like improvisation, right? Because I think a lot of we tend to create these like generative patches. So it's about I think what I like about being with the modular system is like you sit in front of it and it invites you to make choices.
Yes.
Right? It invites you to make choices as you're designing your system, as you're choosing your modules.
Yes.
And then at each session you have to make decisions about where you want to patch your cables and what settings you want, and so there's technical choices and there's aesthetic choices. It's like, where's that sweet spot? Is that a sweet spot? Is that the am I happy with that oscillator sound? Am I happy with that filter setting?
Right.
And so I think knowing what I enjoy about being with the modular system then helps me, informs me on the kind of modules that I want, that I put in my system.
Yeah. And that actually, it's a beautiful lead into my next question, which is, what do you tend to, lean towards, even conceptually, with the, the modules in your system?
Yeah, that's something that I love, like chatting about or reading about on forums. Is like everyone has such different preferences.
Yeah.
And for me, as a rule, I think the only thing that I'm not into is like menu diving.
Yes. Yeah.
So I don't have anything in this system right now that has a screen of any sort. I would say the most complicated thing in there is probably the mini marbles. You know, it's got like a couple of buttons.
Got those modes. Yeah.
It's got the modes, but that's about it. You know, so no menu diving. Nothing too programmable. So I've got the Pittsburgh touch controller, and it's really cool because you can split those 10 pads into 2 different 5-step sequences. And then you can program those.
Right.
But even then, like, you can't save it. You can't, you know.
Right.
You can't save it when you power it off. Yeah. I think a lot of people who know me knows that I love utilities.
Yes. Yeah.
I love utilities, and again, it goes back to my enjoyment of patching, because it's the utilities that allows you to patch things in different ways.
Yeah.
So I love like ideas like switches and attenuverter mixer things.
Yeah.
And so
kind of allowing the control voltage to have as much of a life as the actual timbres, as the actual sonic things. Yes, yeah.
I mean, I love the nice oscillators and the nice filters, but I think I populate my system with more like attenuverters than anything, and you know.
Yeah. Which I mean, again, as long as you've got a single solid sound source. You know, if you've got an incredibly complex array or rich array of CV, you know, tools on the back end, CV, you know, utilities on the back end, you can produce anything. And I'm completely in agreement. One of the things I love about modular is, quite frankly, is that there is almost no distinguishing between, you know, the control voltage domain, you know, the time domain and the frequency domain. They're all kind of mushed together. It's up to you to decide when, you know, oh, now I'm going to plug that into an output, and we call that a sound, right? But it could be the clicking, you know, could be the clicking of a switch, right? It doesn't really make any difference. It comes down to reference. So, that's very, very cool.
I think I have one more. Never mind. It's okay. I forgot.
So then, you know, so one of the things that, you know, certainly I've noticed, and I think a lot of people have over time working with modular, is because, you know, products come from, you know, many different manufacturers, and you know, different design philosophies. Each you know, module is in and of itself possibly a lifetime's worth of exploration. I mean, you mentioned marbles, which is kind of a never-ending you know, box of joy. How do you tend to divide up your time? Because I certainly find a real challenge, like, you know, okay, today I'm going to learn, today I'm going to perform, today I'm going to record, today I'm going to edit. Like, how do you divide up your, you know, the time that you spend with your equipment? Do you have any kind of regimen, or do you just simply come and do it, you know, just sort of as the mood strikes you?
Well, I think the past few months I've been really lucky because I started working at Ryerson University in a lab with, some of you know, with Jason Nolan.
Yes, with Jason. Yeah.
And so I go to work surrounded by modular.
Oh, nice.
So I have the privilege of being around the modular all the time now. Yeah. And so in terms of regimen, I generally don't have a regimen between recording I mean, it's always connected to my sound card, so I do fire it up if I have to. I mean, it's generally connected so that, like, at any time when I was like, okay, this is,
you can just record when you want to.
I can just record it. Most of the time, unless I've been asked to, like, do a live set, I don't really have a direction or a plan or anything. I mean, these days, because I'm working on some academic research related to modular synthesis, so I think a little bit more in those lines. Like, when I'm using it, and I think is so I think in terms of like, what kinds of discussions can come out of this, like even thinking about, like making choices, right? So those are ideas that can lead to a bit of academic discourse. And so I'm kind of, my head is sort of in that space these days. A little bit more than usual.
Sure.
Yeah.
And tell me a little bit about the academic work that you're doing with the modular.
So I work with Jason at Ryerson, and also with Kurt Thumler, who's up at York. Okay. And they're both professors in education. Jason works in early childhood studies, and Kurt works in education on older
students.
And so they are involved in a project that looks at how the modular synthesizer as a concept, as a tool, can introduce ideas of play and self-learning and informal learning and communal learning and experimentation, how it's a tool that can afford those practices, and how that can be possibly introduced into the educational system, which traditionally has been very lacking in those ways of learning music.
In that approach, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So I was brought on as I guess like a consultant sort of type of role, but so I'm helping. I'm helping kind of develop the conversations, But Jason and Kurt are both now working with their own modular system, and we're having a lot of really interesting conversations and setting ourselves these, little challenges, weekly challenges, or, I always try to think up like little activities. It's like, we're doing like a 3-module challenge these days.
Right.
So, so that's
okay. Cool. That's very cool. All right, and you mentioned the life forms. Are there any specific modules other than that you're kind of been focusing on of late?
On this system, it's pretty set. Like, it's got a pretty good balance of things. I've got a couple of oscillators, the Hertz Donut Mark 1, Cursus Iteratus. So those are my 2 main sound sources. I also have a Denim oscillator from Peter Glasser. I have one filter, the Three Sisters, and then these are kind of all modulation, envelope, clock divider, logic, VCA, sequencer, controller. There's a switch, there's a CV recorder, there's another like dual VCA, attenuverters, a couple of LPGs here, quantizer, panning mixer. That's really about it in this case. I have another case that's actually at the lab right now, but the performance I did for this is just this little system.
Very cool. Very cool.
So I haven't been really focusing on anything. I mean, actually, for this patch, for the performance, I started off basically playing with the Hertz Donut, because there's so much you can do with it, and sometimes I just do like one thing with it. So I'm like, I rarely use the sync input, or I rarely use the waveform discontinuity thing. So I started messing around with that as I was starting to develop this short performance.
Cool. All right, and total change of headspace here. What are you listening to at the moment? It's always fun to ask. Fun to ask our community members, kind of, what's on their playlist at the moment.
What am I listening to right now? Let me just check my phone. What am I listening to? Sometimes I listen. A lot of times I listen to my friends' Bandcamp.
Yeah.
So today I was just talking to someone in Vancouver, and he posted a 10-minute performance of a patch he has been working with for 7 months. and it was an amazing. And he actually used this dope for like antennas for gestural control, and it's amazing stuff. So I was listening to that today, and then I listened to, I don't know, anything from like Japanese pop rock to country.
Nice.
And then and then I like, minimal modular stuff. So,
as well. Yeah.
So no one in particular.
Okay, cool. Very cool. Again, change tactics a little bit. Just curious, how did you? I mean, this may be baked already into kind of the history that you told us, but how did you come to sort of Frequency Freaks? How did you come to know about the group, and how did you sort of come to get involved?
So I met Paul a few years ago. I think probably maybe 2016 at a Roland meetup. Okay. Was it a Roland or Roland meetup? Because at the time, Jacob Waters was the Roland sales manager, and then somehow he and I got talking, and I was started doing my PhD back then, which I'm still doing right now. But Jacob invited me to this Roland meetup to have a little presentation on my PhD topic. Mm-hmm. So Paul was in the audience that night, and then he and I just started talking. And then when he organized the Toronto Sound Festival, he asked me to like do a presentation at the Toronto Sound Festival. I'm like, I don't know what. I'm not a good presenter. He's like, no, I saw you at the Roland thing. Like, you're great, you're fine. I was like, okay. So I remember, I think I did a presentation on like sampling in modular. Right. And back in 2016, sampling options was very, very different and much more limited than what we have now. So so that was the beginning of like, getting to know Paul. Right. And then Paul and I just kind of hung out a bit. I remember I brought my flutes over to his place one time, and he sampled some of my flutes, and just just learning stuff from him. And then I started going to the Frequency Freaks, and the Toronto Sound Festival. I think first year I was a presenter, and then the next year I played a set there, and so
cool.
But yeah.
And what part of the sort of what do you get from the community? Like, what interests you about the Frequency Freaks gang?
Well, first of all, everyone is just, I find everyone really open and very supportive of each other. Mm-hmm. I think it's and like just within Toronto or the Toronto area, I think we have a really eclectic and interesting mix of musical backgrounds and
approaches,
musical outputs.
Yeah.
With modular.
Yeah. Would you say that we have a scene in Toronto? Would you say that there's such a thing as TO sound or whatever?
Oh, I don't know if there's a TO sound. I mean, it's definitely a nice scene. And I was just at the Synth Booth conference last weekend.
Okay, yeah.
And I listened to the panel on building community. Mm-hmm. And there was a few Canadians in the chat that was like, oh my god, I need to find a community in Canada. And I was like, oh, there's Frequency Freaks in Toronto, and there's like CBTO and things like that. Yeah. And so there's still people out there that aren't kind of part of a modular community.
Yes.
Some in Toronto. I think I connected with one person in Ottawa who didn't know about Frequency Freaks. But I guess to answer your question, what I get out of it, I've learned so much from just connecting with folks through like frantic buying and selling and trading. Sure, yeah. Which was like all I did for the first like 2 or 3 years. Like I barely like played with anything. I made no music, just like tried modules. And so through that, I learned so much from the people that I met.
Yeah.
And everyone has just been, well, everyone's really knowledgeable about all kinds of things. And so from like a nerdy, geeky point of view of like, oh, I just want to learn like how these modules work and a little bit of DIY and like soldering and things like that.
Yeah.
And I think the community is also, I think there's like very proactive folks in the community that have created spaces like, you know, Gabe with the DIY thing and at Interact Desk, and obviously Paul. And, you know, I think David and some folks are, you know, talking about performing outdoors and...
Yeah, so the modular on the spot.
Yeah, so I think one of the things that the community panel at Synth Booth was talking about is that you need to get the doers together. You need to find the doers and make it happen, and that's how the community builds. So, so I think that in Toronto we have
a good selection of those. Yeah, for sure. So
and yourself to do this interview series.
Well, you know what? I'm just trying to give back because I feel the community's been so, like you said, has been so open and so embracing. You know, and it miss being able to see everybody face to face and get together. But maybe as a silver lining here, right? Which is that you know, at the Frequency Freaks events, oftentimes it's, you know, you get an opportunity to talk, but it's between performance sets. And, you know, here you and I get a chance to, you know, sit down and chat with each other, you know, find out a little bit more about, you know, about each other in a one-on-one kind of fashion.
Yeah.
So, and you know, maybe this little series, you know, will help kind of promote awareness about each other, you know, so that when we do get together again, we'll just have just that much better an insight into, oh, there's Heidi. I wonder, you know, how are you doing with that, you know, with your life forms module,
right.
whatever, you know.
Totally.
So I think it's a wonderful opportunity, and really, I think we should, you know, this is we focus so much these days on how dark things are, right? How challenging the time is right now. But I think I think the COVID has given us kind of, you know, maybe an opportunity to turn our focus, you know, inwards, or maybe, you know, have a bit more of a micro focus rather than a macro focus in terms of the outside. We're not so busy rushing around in the outside world. We can sit down and get a chance to sort of study what we've got. So, well, listen, I really appreciate you taking the time today, Heidi. It's just been a real pleasure talking with you and finding out more about your stuff. And I really appreciate the performance as well. And obviously, I look forward to actually seeing you in person the next time we can actually meet up face to face safely. So, anyway, I'll say thanks very much and have a great day.
Well, thanks Scott for inviting me to chat. Really appreciate it, and hope it was worth your time. And hope to see you around soon.
Super. Okay. Well, take care.
Okay. Thanks, Scott.